shop is filled with old paper, but they don't know what's hidden inside.
The Bookshop in the Rain. Part 1. The lamp beside the door. The rain had been falling over New Orleans since the afternoon. Not the hurried kind of rain that rushed through the streets and disappeared before evening, but the slow, steady rain that seemed content to stay. It drifted softly from the dark sky, touching rooftops, balconies, cobblestones, and old oak trees with patient hands. Every window carried tiny silver streams. Every brick glistened beneath the gentle storm. It was the autumn of 1916. The city moved more quietly than usual. Horse-drawn wagons rolled slowly through puddles, their wheels making soft splashing sounds that echoed between old buildings. Street cars rattled along wet tracks with glowing lamps shining through the mist. Gas lanterns flickered one by one as daylight slowly surrendered to evening. Somewhere in the French Quarter, tucked between a tailor's shop and a tiny cafe with shuttered windows, stood a narrow bookstore. It did not have a grand sign. Only a weathered wooden board hung above the entrance. Its faded gold letters simply read, Beaumont Son, rare and antique books. The paint had begun to crack with age. The wood smelled faintly of cedar after so many rainy seasons. The little brass bell above the door waited quietly for the next visitor. But for now, no one came, only the rain. It whispered against the windows. It tapped softly upon the roof. It drummed gently inside the gutters before slipping into the narrow streets below. Inside the bookstore, another kind of music filled the air, the quiet crackling of a fireplace. Its orange flames danced lazily inside a large stone hearth near the back wall. Every few moments a log shifted with a soft sigh, sending a handful of tiny sparks upward before settling once again into glowing embers. The warmth spread slowly through every room. It settled into old wooden shelves, into thick Persian rugs, into worn leather chairs, into every page of every waiting book. The shop smelled wonderfully alive. Old leather bindings, a little cedar from the shelves, a faint sweetness of yellowing paper, dust that had rested peacefully for decades, warm beeswax polish, and just the smallest hint of cinnamon from tea that had been brewed not long ago. It was the sort of place where every breath felt slower than the one before. Every shelf reached almost to the ceiling. Ladders rested against polished wood, waiting for hands that might climb toward books resting high above. Some books were bound in smooth brown leather. Others wore faded green cloth. Some carried tiny gold letters upon their spines that caught the firelight whenever the flames danced. Others had no titles at all. Only time had named them. Rain blurred the world outside. Inside, everything glowed. A brass lamp stood upon the front desk. Its soft golden light reached across neat stacks of books and scattered handwritten notes. Behind the desk sat Mr. Arthur Beaumont. He was nearly 70 years old. His silver hair curled gently beneath his spectacles. His beard was neatly trimmed. His hands were thin, careful hands, the sort of hands that turned pages slowly, hands that respected every fragile binding, hands that had repaired thousands of books over many years. He wore a dark wool waistcoat beneath a comfortable cardigan. Though the fire burned warmly, old habits had taught him never to complain about extra warmth during rainy weather. Arthur looked toward the front window. The glass shimmered beneath countless raindrops. He smiled. I rather hoped it would rain tonight. No one answered. The bookstore rarely needed conversation. The shelves themselves seemed perfectly happy listening to the weather. Arthur reached beside his chair and picked up a thick leather-bound volume. Before opening it, he paused. He always paused. Books deserve that much. Almost like greeting an old friend before beginning a conversation. His fingers rested gently upon the worn cover. The leather felt smooth from generations of readers, cool in some places, warm in others where it had rested close to the fire. He slowly opened the cover. The pages whispered. There was no better word for it. Not a rustle, not a crackle. A whisper. Thin paper speaking softly after many years of waiting. Arthur breathed in. Old books had a scent unlike anything else. Some carried traces of oak shelves. Others remembered dry summers. Some smelled faintly of lavender where flowers had once rested between forgotten pages. Others hinted at sea journeys, candle smoke, old libraries, or quiet houses where they had been read, beside windows just like this one. Every book carried memories too gentle to describe with ordinary words. Arthur believed that. He had believed it for most of his life. Outside, rain continued its patient song, steady, gentle, never hurried. The fire answered with tiny crackles. Together they created a rhythm that seemed older than the city itself. Arthur read only a few pages before carefully marking his place. He stood. His knees complained softly. They always did these days. He smiled again. I know, he whispered to them. He walked slowly toward the shelves. The floorboards welcomed every step with familiar little creaks, not loud ones, comfortable ones, the kind that belonged only to old buildings that had learned every footstep over many decades. He stopped beside the tallest shelf. Its upper rows disappeared into warm shadows near the ceiling. Running one finger along the wood, Arthur felt tiny marks left by time, little scratches, tiny dents, places where ladders had rested hundreds of times. Nothing perfect, everything beautiful. He selected a book bound in faded blue cloth, then another. A small atlas printed many years before, a collection of poems, an old botanical guide filled with delicate hand-colored flowers. He arranged them upon a nearby table simply because they looked pleasant together. No customer had requested them. There was no reason at all, except that rainy evenings invited beautiful arrangements. The fire glowed brighter for a moment. Its light stretched across polished wooden floors until every knot and grain shimmered softly. Near the window stood two deep armchairs. Their leather had become wonderfully smooth with age. The cushions had settled exactly where countless readers had rested over the years. A knitted blanket lay folded across one arm. No one remembered who had made it. Perhaps Arthur's wife many years ago. Perhaps his mother. Perhaps someone else entirely. It no longer mattered. The blanket belonged to the bookstore now, like the clock above the fireplace, like the brass lamp, like the smell of paper. The old clock ticked patiently, never rushing, never slowing. Its gentle heartbeat blended perfectly with the rain. Tick, rain, crackle, tick, rain, crackle. Arthur filled a small kettle from a polished copper pitcher. He placed it near the fire, rather than directly above it. The water would warm slowly. Tea, he believed, should never be hurried. While waiting, he wandered through the narrow aisles once more. Each shelf carried tiny handwritten labels: history, poetry, travel, natural science, maps, music, philosophy, letters, folklore. Many visitors searched eagerly through them. Arthur never hurried them. Some customers stayed for hours without buying anything. That pleased him. Books enjoyed company. Part 2. Shelves of Quiet Memories. The rain did not grow louder. It simply continued, soft, steady, patient. Each drop found its own quiet place upon the roof of Beaumont and Son. Some rolled gently along the old gutters. Others rested for a moment on the window panes before slipping down in winding silver lines. Inside the bookstore, time seemed to move differently. The outside world still measured the passing hours with clocks and streetcars and busy footsteps. But inside these walls, time was measured by the settling of embers, by the cooling of tea, by the turning of pages. Arthur Beaumont stood beside the front window for several long moments, his warm cup resting comfortably between his hands. The porcelain had become pleasantly warm rather than hot. He liked it that way. The first sip of tea awakened the senses. The last sip invited rest. Outside, the narrow street shone beneath the rain like polished stone. The lantern, hanging above the shop door, cast a golden circle onto the wet pavement. Each raindrop passed through its light, before disappearing into the growing puddles below. The reflections danced gently, never hurried, never still. Arthur watched them with quiet contentment. He had spent nearly 50 years looking through this very window. He had watched bright spring mornings, heavy summer afternoons, golden autumn evenings, cold winter rains. He had watched children become adults, young couples grow old together, travelers arrive with eager faces and depart carrying carefully wrapped books beneath their arms. Part 4. The Hidden Reading Room. The rain continued through the night. Not once did it rush. Not once did it seem impatient. It fell in long silver threads from the dark Louisiana sky, touching the rooftops of New Orleans with gentle hands. Water slipped quietly along brick walls, gathered beneath wrought iron balconies, and wandered through the narrow streets in tiny streams that shimmered beneath the gas lamps. The city had become wonderfully still. Most windows had already gone dark. The cafes had closed their shutters. The last streetcar had long since disappeared into the mist, leaving only its memory behind. Yet inside Beaumont and Son, the night remained warm. The fireplace glowed softly, filling the bookstore with slow waves of comforting heat. Every shelf seemed to breathe in that warmth. Every leather binding grew pleasantly soft. Every page rested peacefully inside its cover, protected from the damp weather beyond the old wooden walls. Arthur Beaumont sat quietly for several minutes without opening a single book. He simply listened. The rain upon the roof, the gentle crackle of oak logs, the steady heartbeat of the grandfather clock, the old building itself. Bookstores were never completely silent. Wood expanded with warmth. Shelves settled almost invisibly. Tiny sounds drifted from forgotten corners, as though the house itself were stretching comfortably after a long day. Arthur smiled. He had lived with these sounds for so many years that they felt like familiar voices. Outside, people listened to rain. Inside, he listened to the bookstore. The hidden room, with its ancient shelves and soft firelight, seemed to float outside the passing hours. It asked nothing of Arthur except that he remain still, breathe deeply, and allow the quiet beauty of old books, warm cedar, gentle rain, and flickering flames to settle peacefully around him. The bookstore above remained asleep. The city beyond remained wrapped in rain. And beneath the old shelves of Beaumont and Son, the hidden reading room kept its timeless watch, holding its countless stories in perfect silence until another peaceful night, another gentle reader, and another turning page would awaken them once more. The night had grown older, yet the rain remained faithful. It continued to fall over New Orleans with the same gentle rhythm it had carried since the afternoon. Every rooftop welcomed its soft touch. Every brick wall glistened beneath the warm glow of the gas lamps. The narrow streets reflected tiny pools of golden light, each one trembling gently whenever another raindrop landed upon its surface. Inside Beaumont and Son, nothing hurried. The bookstore rested in a peaceful silence that felt almost sacred. The fireplace no longer burned with tall flames. Instead, it glowed with quiet confidence. Deep orange embers rested beneath the blackened oak logs, sending gentle waves of warmth across the polished wooden floor. Every few moments, a tiny spark floated upward before disappearing into the chimney like a small star drifting into the night sky. Arthur Beaumont remained in his favorite leather chair. The knitted blanket rested comfortably across his knees. His hands, marked by many years of careful work, lay quietly upon the arms of the chair. For a long while he simply watched the fire. There was something wonderfully calming about glowing embers. Unlike bright flames, they asked for nothing. They neither hurried nor demanded attention. They simply remained warm, steady, patient, much like the old bookstore itself. Arthur slowly rose from his chair. The familiar creak of the floorboards greeted him with quiet affection. He picked up the brass lamp, whose warm light painted soft circles across the shelves. Every book seemed wrapped in peaceful shadows. The titles shimmered gently in faded gold. Some letters had grown so worn that only Arthur could recognize them without opening the covers. He smiled. There were books here he could find with his eyes closed. Years had taught him where every story rested. He wandered toward a narrow shelf near the center of the bookstore. Unlike the taller bookcases, this one held smaller volumes, pocket-sized poetry, travel journals, collections of handwritten letters. Arthur's fingertips moved slowly along the bindings. Then they stopped. A little brown leather book rested quietly between two larger volumes. Its cover carried no title, only a simple pressed design around the edges. Arthur lifted it carefully. The leather had become wonderfully smooth. Time had polished it more beautifully than any craftsman ever could. When he opened the cover, several folded letters rested inside. They were tied together with a faded blue ribbon. Arthur untied the ribbon slowly. The paper felt remarkably delicate. Its edges had softened over the decades. The ink remained clear, though slightly faded into warm shades of brown. The first letter began simply, "To whoever may one day read these words." Arthur smiled gently. He had read these letters many times before, yet every rainy evening made them feel new again. He settled into the chair beside the fireplace. The warm light danced softly across the pages. Outside, rain whispered against the windows. Inside, another quiet voice seemed to awaken through careful handwriting. The unknown writer spoke of peaceful evenings spent reading beside a window, of warm tea shared with friends, of afternoons when sunlight rested upon bookshelves. Nothing extraordinary, only ordinary moments remembered with extraordinary kindness. Arthur believed those were the finest memories, not grand adventures, not great victories, simply quiet evenings that had made someone's heart feel peaceful. He folded the first letter, then opened another. This one described the scent of an old library after rain. Arthur breathed deeply, almost as though the writer had reached across the years to describe the very room in which he now sat. Old paper, leather, oak shelves, wood smoke, a trace of lavender hidden somewhere among forgotten pages. The bookstore carried every one of those fragrances. The air itself seemed filled with gentle memories. Arthur closed his eyes for a moment. The rain continued. The fire answered softly. The clock marked another quiet minute. Every sound belonged exactly where it was. He placed the letters carefully back inside the little book. The faded ribbon was tied once again with patient hands. Nothing inside Beaumont Son was ever rushed. The letters returned to their place upon the shelf, waiting quietly. Perhaps another reader would discover them many years from now. Perhaps they would smile just as Arthur always did. The Keeper of Forgotten Books. The rain had become softer, not because the storm was ending, only because the night itself had grown quieter. After so many hours, the gentle rhythm of falling rain seemed to belong to the bookstore as naturally as the shelves, the fireplace, or the old grandfather clock. Every drop that touched the roof became another peaceful note in a melody that had been playing since the afternoon. Arthur Beaumont stood beside the upstairs window. The little brass lamp glowed quietly behind him. Beyond the rain-covered glass, New Orleans rested beneath a blanket of mist. Rows of rooftops disappeared into the darkness. Only the warm circles of distant gas lamps could be seen, shining softly through the rain like tiny stars resting upon the streets below. Arthur watched them for a long while. There was no need to count the passing minutes. The bookstore never hurried the night. At last, he turned away from the window. The cedar floor beneath his shoes gave a familiar little creak. He smiled. The old boards had greeted him with the same gentle sound for nearly 50 years. Some friendships required very few words. He carried the brass lamp down the narrow staircase. Its warm glow followed him, painting the walls with moving shadows. The books resting upon the shelves seemed peaceful beneath the amber light. Their faded leather bindings reflected quiet shades of brown, gold and deep burgundy. Some looked almost asleep. Downstairs the fire still glowed gently. The flames had become small now, wrapping themselves lazily around the oak logs. The warmth, however, remained. It lingered in every chair, every shelf, every polished floorboard. The bookstore held its warmth the way old books held stories, patiently, without effort. Arthur crossed the room until he reached a cabinet standing near the fireplace. It was made of dark walnut wood. Its brass handles had grown smooth through many years of careful use. Most visitors believed it contained valuable first editions. Instead, it held something Arthur considered far more precious: small notebooks, hundreds of them, each one carefully labeled with a year. Every notebook contained nothing more than memories. When the rain began to fade, the longest hours of the night had quietly passed. Beyond the old windows of Beaumont Son, the rain still drifted down from the dark sky, but something had changed. The steady rhythm that had filled the city for so many hours had become lighter now, softer than before, like a lullaby gently coming to its final verse. Arthur Beaumont noticed it without looking outside. He heard it. The roof no longer carried the deep, constant music of heavy rain. Instead, gentle drops touched the shingles one by one. The gutters no longer rushed with water. They whispered. The old bookstore listened with him. The grandfather clock continued its patient heartbeat. Tick, pause, tick, pause. The fireplace glowed warmly. Only a few quiet flames remained, dancing lazily around the last oak log. The room felt wonderfully comfortable. Not too warm, not too cool. Exactly the kind of warmth that invited slow breathing and peaceful thoughts. Arthur rested quietly in the leather chair beside the fire. His eyes wandered across the shelves. Thousands of books surrounded him. Some had waited there for years, others for generations. Yet none seemed impatient. Books understood waiting better than almost anything else. They knew that every story found its reader when the time was right. A faint gray light slowly began to gather behind the clouds. Night was quietly stepping aside. Morning was approaching with gentle footsteps. He returned the brass lamp to the reading table. Its flame seemed less necessary now. The coming dawn would soon provide its own quiet light. The bookstore looked beautiful in this in-between hour. Not fully night, not yet morning. Firelight and early dawn shared the room together. Amber, silver, soft gray, warm gold. The colors blended peacefully across the bookshelves. Arthur sat down one final time beside the fire. He closed his eyes, not to sleep, only to listen. The rain, now only a whisper. The clock, steady as ever. The fire, breathing gently. Outside, the final drops of rain slipped gently from the rooftops. Inside, the old bookstore rested peacefully, wrapped in the fading warmth of the fire, the comforting scent of old books, and the timeless silence that had filled its shelves for generations. The storm had almost finished its journey. Morning was almost ready to begin, and Beaumont Son waited calmly, just as it always had, for the first soft light of a new day.